The end of Battlefield 2042's live service has left many players with a lingering question. Can this ever-aging franchise pull itself out of the depths that the latest entries have cast it into? While the answer to that may vary depending on who you ask, the overarching consensus is that the future of Battlefield hinges on what EA and DICE are going to do with the upcoming title. Andrew Wilson, the president of EA, has recently commented on progress of the next Battlefield during the quarterly investors call, where he mentioned that the game is in playable state and that it is shaping up to be a tremendous live service. Needlessly to say, this has sparked a rather negative reaction from the gamers on a wider scale, as the AAA live service products in the recent years have almost universally been a disappointment across the board. Despite that, EA seems to be pushing in that direction once again in spite of their own player base's wishes. However, this problem of disconnect between the publishers, developers and their audience is not entirely new. EA and DICE have a bit of unfortunate history of sour relationship with their own customers, but that wasn't always the case. If we transport ourselves about 15 years back in time, we will see a very different image of this back and forth between the devs and the fans of the franchise. Battlefield Bad Company series was a perfect example of a healthy relationship, and it all began with the fact that the developers themselves were clearly having fun working on their projects. Marketing campaign for both Bad Company games as well as behind-the-scenes videos were a proof of this very different approach DICE had at the time, and it stretched into the post-launch support as well. It wasn't uncommon for them to reach out to the community and source direct feedback, which was then incorporated into the game, from simple bug fixes and addressing technical issues, to even polls on what maps fans would like to see adapted into the game, which were then released in form of VIP packs. This kind of approach has built trust and generated goodwill between both parties, but that scenario unfortunately wouldn't last forever. EA being EA has quickly turned their strategy to focus more on quick profit. Battlefield 3 introduced the premium system, which was met with a polarizing response at the time. A year later, Battlefield 4 launched with a disastrous effect due to the unfinished state the game was in, which established itself on cards of the gaming history as one of the most broken video game releases of all time. The trust between EA, DICE and Battlefield fanbase was eroding more and more, but the worst was still yet to come. While EA was the central entity responsible for souring of these relationships, as the time went on it became clear that some of the management at DICE Sweden itself was not entirely innocent either. The rising tensions sparked by poor state most of their new games were being released in have caused the developers themselves to respond to community in increasingly bitter tone. Instead of addressing the widespread criticism and feedback, they began issuing responses, often even playing the victim card, which only fueled more controversies and conflict with their customers, which in turn has painted a very different picture of the modern DICE in comparison to how they looked and carried themselves 15 years back, as this once passionate studio now seems to be unable to understand its own player base on a fundamental level. This, perhaps more than anything, is the core issue with the modern DICE. It is difficult for a franchise as big as Battlefield to pull itself back up when its own creators are handicapping its potential by refusing to learn from their own repeated mistakes and addressing the long-standing issues their fanbase has been clear about for years. While the regular workforce at these companies is not to blame, both the middle and upper management have shown poor judgment and questionable decision-making time and time again, which paired with this growing tendency to vilify their own audience makes for a very unsavory combo. It kind of feels like a time loop that never ends. Games get rushed out the door, fans receive it poorly, 2 years of fixing the issues that shouldn't have been there to begin with, and finally the end of support. But it shouldn't be like this. Battlefield seems to be stuck in this one step forward, one step back cycle, but if it wasn't the case, then imagine the heights this franchise could reach. However, until the higher-ups see the error of their ways, or get replaced with someone who has a better understanding of the market and legacy of their own products, the toxic life cycle will continue to go on, as likely will the downward spiral Battlefield has been in as a franchise.